Έφυγα απ' το Φαραώ της Αιγύπτου τη σκλαβιά, μ' αρχηγό το Μωυσή έφτασα ως το Σινά. Στο Σινά να ανεβώ, πολύ το επιθυμώ, στην Αγία κορυφή και να λέω την ευχή. Η ανάβαση σκληρή, Θεέ μου δώσ' μου υπομονή, καρτερία κι αντοχή, να αποκτήσω την ευχή. Πρώτα υπακοή, η γραφή και το κέλι, η Αγία σιωπή δυναμώνουν την ευχή.
Paul Dukes, a British music student in St. Petersburg, met Prince Ozay, evidently Gurdjieff, in 1913. He, having learned piano from Anna Yesipova and developing a career as operatic voice trainer, learned chanting and prayer combined with breathing exercises from Prince Ozay. A story about Paul Dukes' first love with Vera and its disastrous end must have been communicated to his brother Ashley upon his temporary homecoming in 1917, and from him spread to his literary friends, serving as material for a dill pickle by Mansfield, and for the Hermione story in Women in Love by Lawrence. Together with it, some information about Prince Ozay and his teaching must have reached them, forming a pre-Ouspensky link between Gurdjieff and the British literary circle. Paul Dukes wrote, "A greater measure of the mantric art survived in the Greek Orthodox Church, especially in its Russian branch, on account of its devotion to pure song without instrumental interference." Prince Ozay, who was evidently Gurdjieff, saw prayer as a devotional physical exercise of high spiritual value, designed to train the breath of life by which we live, and to be executed with this intent in certain clearly defined postures. A few years later, Peter Ouspensky heard Gurdjieff talk of an exercise that had been preserved in the monasteries of Mount Athos. A monk kneels or stands in a certain position and, lifting his arms, which are bent at the elbows, he says, "Ego" aloud a while listening at the same time where the word ego sounds. The purpose of this exercise is to feel I every moment a man thinks of himself and to bring I from one sender to another.
Myself, the result of I.
I am myself, the result of I. This comprises an octave, with I repeated after that beginning another cycle. Pronouncing them is compared with the art of hitting of different bells in an Orthodox monastery, like this Alexander Nevsky Abbey in St. Petersburg. Paul Dukes visited the abbey in the beginning of the Holy Week, probably of 1914, having been advised to do so by Prince Ozay, so that he might hear the echoing of the names mentioned in the beginning of the Lord's Prayer, which Prince Ozay referred to also as logos, which later became theomermalogos in the Beelzebub's tales. The abbey's large premises are full of spirits and ghosts, one of which should be of Fyodor Dostoevsky, who swooned to death in an epileptic fit after prematurely concluding the brothers Karamazov in a compromising manner, giving undue credit to slavishly innocent Alyosha and the doubtful sainthood of Father Zosima, making this book, although still a masterpiece where the three brothers represent the three centers of man, with Misha, the oldest, arriving at the utterance of I am, falls short of fully representing the secret of a seed having to die in order to be reborn, which had been the aim the author stated in the beginning. As a result, the book came to be praised by the Russian Orthodox Church and loved by celebrities like President Putin. The following conversation took place between Prince Ozay and Paul Dukes. Dukes, what name? Ozay, when you say, hallowed be thy name, what do you mean? Dukes, I never thought about it. Ozay, in your church, nobody thinks about it. But the key is in your scriptures. In the beginning was the name, and the name was with God, and the name was God. Dukes, in the beginning was the word, not name. Ozay, logos, if you like. The logos represents the action of the primordial laws which preceded language. And it is the name above all names because it is the destroyer of all forms of identifying with lower forms of creation. Hiramasa. What is another subject that must be discussed first? Seimei. It is the subject of Shu. Hiramasa, Shu? Seimei. Yes, first understand what is Shu. Hiramasa, tell me what is Shu. Seimei. Well, it is a spell produced by names. This is from Volume 1 of On Myoji, The Masters of Duality, by Reiko Okano. As I mentioned in the last of my autobiographical videos, the author incorporates certain ideas from Gurdjieff in these stories, for which she thanks KM, a Japanese woman who had spent years with a Gurdjieff Foundation New York group. She provoked me to go to Osho in our meeting in 1988. This brings us to the story of the magician and sheep told by Gurdjieff.
Further, the magician suggested to his sheep that they were not sheep at all. To some of them he suggested that they were lions, to others that they were eagles, to others that they were men, and to others that they were magicians. And after this all, his cares and worries about the sheep came to an end. They never ran away again, but quietly awaited the time when the magician would require their flesh and their skins.
Such a spell produced by names or the phenomenon of identifying can cause man to continue to believe in his imaginary self or, in the case of a wrongly started person on a spiritual path, hold on to a juvenile dream of oneness with God, a higher state of consciousness, spiritual power, and so on. This is the lowest state. The self-deceit in which a man lives considering even his most mechanical actions to be volitional and conscious, and believing himself to be single and whole. In the Holy Trinity Cathedral of Alexander Nevsky Abbey during that Holy Week which preceded the war, Paul Dukes comes to a limit while listening to the voice of a particular young priest known by Prince Ozay reading from a Bible. This became the first of the more than several cases of male seekers. In spite of their interest in following Gurdjieff, giving up quite soon or after some years with the demonstration of curious weakness. P.D. Ouspensky, J.G. Bennett, A.R. Orridge, Thomas de Hartmann, and so on. They are talented ones, and most probably being so, they would not follow the development of the octave beyond a certain point. Here is a summary of what Paul Dukes wrote about his experience. He begins on a note about an octave below middle C, rising one semitone with each phrase, at the same time swelling the volume. Already his voice resounds in mighty waves among the vaults and arches. When he reached about E flat, I noticed something quite extraordinary happening in his voice. He appeared to be directing it in a certain way. I did not hear the effect, I felt it, piercingly, almost like a pain. Analogous to the pain one feels in the eyes when moving abruptly from gloom into a brilliant light. I was afraid I might totter and fall, and had to pull myself together with an effort. It was a disconcerting experience. I found the sense of being carried away unbearable. Paul Dukes reports exchanges with Prince Ozay that took place after this event. I won't say it was exactly pleasant. "Young man," he answered severely, "do you condemn the sun because it blinds you to look at it, or fire because it burns if you to touch it, or your muscles if they ache from strain? Truth must always be revealed in small doses. Greatly diluted. And sound, too, has to be rationed, especially the name which is above every name. That is why the name must be hallowed. An overdose might easily kill you before you're trained for it. Might it have killed me in the cathedral?" I asked, awed. My face must have betrayed the thought, for I saw his expression change. "Young man," he said, sternly reproving, "I could kill you in an instant, sitting here, without either of us moving a muscle." "Are you afraid of risks?" he said, gently once more, but still with a note of reproof. "Understand this clearly. No man can acquire this kind of knowledge without risking death. God, misapplied, is the devil. There is only one force in creation. Good and evil lie merely in its application."
The stories are such that a man is there whose life is in a parrot. If you kill the parrot, the man will be killed. I ask, can you tell me where your life is? Because I would like to try. What do you mean? I said, I would like to kill that bird in which your life is.
In relation to this subject of a man being likely to suffer limitation in following ascending octaves to heaven as a result of misapplying God. Poignant is a story he tells in a chapter titled Holy Charlatanry in his autobiography as an episode that preceded his meeting with Prince Ozay. In this chapter he tells how, in a Russian village where he stayed as an English tutor, he came to be known among the villagers as Uncle Moon, a man from another world and a miraculous healer. This was a result of experimenting with hypnotic healing in imitation of Lev Lvovich, who learned hypnosis after it saved his life during his military service in Central Asia. Dukes experimented this first on a village boy, Petka, out of his goodness and innocence, just in the manner of Holy Alyosha, the youngest of the brothers Karamazov, who troubled the author because, unlike his two brothers, he would not come near to the point of dying as a seed so that he might be reborn. Dukes copied Lev in making the boy laugh and relax, giving him suggestions, and calling for the help of good spirits. To this he added the saying of the Lord's Prayer in English. The quick healing of Petka convinced the villagers of his sainthood and power, causing more of them to ask for his help. Dukes becomes alarmed when even village priests began to trust him and ask for his help. Dukes is divided between the idea of his doing something good to them and the idea of his doing something bad and evil, potentially harmful to them. Finally, however, Dukes appears to have been more inclined to justify himself with the phrase, if it is charlatanry, it is holy charlatanry. Dukes, after all, was a priest's son, steeped in the business of misapplying God. Hearing this story from Dukes, Lev Lvovich, amused but alarmed, brought him to Prince Ozay, for whom, that is, Gurdjieff. The question was of serious importance, as we now know from his writings, including Life is Real Only Then When I Am, in which he tells his own story parallel to this. Finding a relevant answer to the question of right and wrong application requires one to have threefold and sevenfold views on God and man, as a dervish says at the end of the first act of the Struggles of the Magicians, a ballet produced by Gurdjieff. So, in the case of hypnotic healing, to judge whether it is good or evil, one must divide man into three parts and evaluate its benefit and harm separately for each, and also considering their relations. Then, Gurdjieff's seemingly contradictory attitudes to some of his pupils, like literally saving one's life by the use of his power but then testing him mercilessly, like in the cases of Thomas de Hartmann and Fritz Peters, may be better understood. People may be forgiven if they don't quite understand. But according to the dervish, it is a sin if someone preaches about God without understanding this. So, how Dukes came to preach afterward. His preaching emphasizes the importance of keeping the body perfect and make it last long as instrument with which the Creator has provided us to do His will, because to make it decay is the sin against the Holy Ghost, the only sin that cannot be forgiven. He further preaches that even though high spiritual power often manifests itself even through an imperfect medium, manifestations would be still more effective through a perfected one. He calls this spiritual aspect of material values. My God, isn't this the teaching of slavery? Making oneself a good instrument for God, that is to say, the downward process of creation coming from above? Of course, God needs this too. But isn't He also sick of such instruments like Noah, Abraham, and Job, who is praised by Father Zosima, the master of Holy Alyosha? So, He welcomed Jacob when he cheated his father, outwitted his brother, and strived to climb the octaves to heaven, which was shown to him in his dream. Yes, the ladder that Dukes could not climb. Instead, Dukes' preaching sounds more like the words of hypnosis from the story of the magician and sheep told by Gurdjieff. And, in fact, his life after meeting Prince Ozay went into that direction. Serving the country during the war as translator at the information office of the British Embassy in St. Petersburg, serving as an M16 secret agent in Russia after the revolution, winning a medal for it, then living by that name and fame, doing lecture tours in America, being engaged in body-focused American yoga and experimenting with acrobatic dancing, and dreaming of longevity, which he did not attain, dropping the music career, because now he knew how his sensitivity to music might expose his gross body to what risks. He might see truth about his endless quest, that he is not ascending higher than E-flat. So, even though it may be true when he says that Prince Ozay set him on a path, it is more likely a path away from him or a path traveled with a safe distance from him. Here I may add something about P.D. Ouspensky, as someone similarly came to a limit shortly after the beginning of intense exchanges with Gurdjieff. What he could not bear was a focus on himself as someone whose attention was always moving outward, as recalled by Anna, his girlfriend in those days. In Tertium Organum, he wrote about one of his first mystical experiences in the following manner: I watched this play of the waves with the ship, and felt them draw me to themselves. The waves were drawing my soul to themselves. And suddenly I felt it went to them. It lasted an instant, perhaps less than an instant. But I entered into the waves and with them rushed with a howl at the ship. And in that instant I became all. What is this? A state of being identified where one loses any sense of oneself. Maybe he was under the influence of hashish? He called this cosmic consciousness. Ouspensky asked Gurdjieff his opinion. Gurdjieff was not interested. I do not know what you call cosmic consciousness. It is a vague and indefinite term. Anyone can call anything he likes by it. Sometime later in a group meeting, Gurdjieff asked the group, "What is the most important thing that we notice during self-observation?" Ouspensky. I had evidently not altogether understood the question, or I answered my own thoughts, because I said that what struck me most was the connectedness of one thing with another in the system. The wholeness of the system, as if it were an organism, and the entirely new significance of the word to know, which included not only the idea of knowing but Gurdjieff. Not one of you has noticed the most important thing that I have pointed out to you, that is to say, not one of you has noticed that you do not remember yourselves. Try to remember yourselves when you observe yourselves and later on tell me the results. Only those results will have any value that are accompanied by self-remembering. Otherwise you yourselves do not exist in your observations. In which case, what are all your observations worth? This was in St. Petersburg. When Gurdjieff had gone back to Moscow, Ouspensky thought of this and devised the famous double arrow exercise, in which one imagines an arrow pointing toward oneself to complement the outgoing arrow, and try to keep the two arrows. Ouspensky tried this while taking a walk along streets of St. Petersburg and felt differences, which made him believe that he had made a great discovery of self-remembering. I think that this exercise could be done for certain merits but at the same time can be quite deceptive, because of the imaginary nature of the second arrow pointed to oneself. What a good method for a coward to have an enhanced sense of oneself with an imaginary arrow. This deceit was made evident when he and other group members were told to tell others about themselves. He found that he could not tell about himself. This surprises him because he could do this well when he wrote The Strange Life of Ivan Osokin before he began to wear a teacher's personality. He restored this capability when he rewrote it before his death after he gave up the system he taught and his status as a teacher. Yet, the followers today of the teaching he abandoned still show the same limitation. It looks like Paul Dukes terminated contact with Prince Ozay by the beginning of 1915, when he became fully occupied as a translator at the information office of the British Embassy in St. Petersburg. He seems to have had no contact with Gurdjieff's groups in St. Petersburg and Moscow that continued to be active from 1915 until the occurrence of revolution in 1917. Paul Dukes initially sympathized with the revolution, when it retained a Russian character, but became quickly disillusioned as it changed character under the German influence. The idea of revolution sought some base in Christian ideas about resurrection, or the principle of upward movement arising from downward movement according to the working of three forces, which appealed to the Russian mind. Much evil came first from the mechanical formulation of this idea into a dialectic theory by Hegel, second by its misuse by Marx to justify violent revolution, and thirdly by its application by Lenin. After the February Revolution in 1917, Paul Dukes was called back to Britain by the Foreign Office as a Russia expert, and soon he volunteered to go back to Russia as an M16 agent. Was not that Prince Ozay's seeing him as a young man not ready to risk himself for truth drove him into such a direction good for the Britain, for which he received the title of Sir when he returned home after 2 years. Soon after his return, he started lecture tours in America, associated himself with American yoga movement, and got married with a rich American woman in 1922, from whom he divorced in 1928. In the meantime, Gurdjieff did communal living experiments in Ouspensky after the 1917 revolution, reopened his institute first in Tiflis, Georgia, and then in Constantinople, and finally settled in Chateau Prieur in Fontainebleau near Paris. In these years, Gurdjieff developed ballet, the movements, as a form of prayer that dynamically involves the whole presence of man according to principles that he had discussed with Paul Dukes. Gurdjieff sailed to New York from France on January 4, 1924, and stayed there from January to February, giving lectures and movements demonstrations. The pupils showed a number of sacred dances with the demonstration of psychic phenomena such as telepathy and thought reading, and the audience was told to distinguish tricks, half-tricks, and real, supernatural, phenomena. According to Gurdjieff, pupils have to learn about charlatanry, become able to do it themselves, so that they may know what is real and what is not. This was too much for Paul Dukes? What was he doing then? Trying to learn tap dancing at a dance studio near the Times Square. Did not he know that Prince Ozay was coming? Of course. He must have known, a former M16 agent, now always on lookout for anything new on the American spiritual scene. I suppose he was scared. He had been married there 2 years before. But probably he went to see one of the demonstrations in disguise? After his marriage failed in 1928, he did a long fasting alone in France, then turned to acrobat dancing with Nadine Nikolaeva and Serge Renoff from Russian ballet. The trio commercially performed for 60 weeks apiece that acrobatically represented a fight between the higher and lower centers over the middle. Of course, the lower wins. Nadine was a student of Ouspensky and is known to have later produced pieces inspired by Gurdjieff's movements. In this connection, Dukes asserts that acrobat dancing for her was a pursuit of higher state of consciousness. But, again, this sounds like misinterpretation in view of the compensatory nature of what he was doing. One might go into all sorts of stunts rather than dying as a seed, coming out of the primitive state of oneness, which the movements mildly demands by instructing to change the sense of oneself as one changes from one position to another, shifts weight from one foot to another foot, or having the sense of oneself sometimes in the head, sometimes in the spine, and so on. How it would be possible to do acrobats remaining in just one concentrated state of higher consciousness, without such inner dynamisms that give life to the movements. On the other hand, how a misguided performer may do the movements in that way, rigidly fixed in and identified with a single state of consciousness, getting some kicks out of it. In this and some other ways, such as the misuse of names in advertisement. The subjects covered in this presentation are relevant today, particularly to those who come near to the practice of the movements, as it can be different things for different persons. Having been designed to represent working of the logos, in terms of the law of 3 and the law of 7, its action can be that of a living master or that of the higher notes that Dukes found unbearable, but just because of being such. People who are attracted but not ready to risk find some means to mitigate the impact but stay in the fantasy of being with the master or being in the work. So, what Ouspensky heard from Gurdjieff in 1915 about his ballet, The Stubble of the Magicians, is still valid today as it was then. The important scenes represented the schools of a black magician and a white magician, with exercises by pupils of both schools and a struggle between the two schools. Gurdjieff said that the same performers would have to act and dance in the white magician scene and in the black magician. You understand that in this way they will see and study all sides of themselves. Consequently, the ballet will be of immense importance for self-study. Gurdjieff spoke as follows on the subject of black magic and charlatanry. Everyone always does everything in the interests of good as he understands it. Black magic may be quite altruistic, may strive after the good of humanity, but what can be called black magic has always one definite characteristic. This is the tendency to use people for some aims without their knowledge, either by producing in them faith and infatuation or by acting upon them through fear. But a black magician, whether good or evil, has at all events been at a school. He has learned something. There are many things worse than black magic. Such are various occult and theosophical societies and groups. Not only have their teachers never been at a school, but they have never even met anyone who has been near a school. Their work simply consists in aping. Imitation of this kind gives a great deal of self-satisfaction. No realization of one's nothingness can be got here. On the contrary, the members of such circles acquire a realization of their own importance and a growth of false personality. Abridged from Chapter 11, In Search of the Miraculous. The situation must have been similar in 1918 when Gurdjieff spoke as follows in Ouspensky. But today more serious, as people tend to look for answers in a digital space instead of seeking truth through contacts with living masters and people on the way. Go out one clear starlit night to some open space and look up at the sky, at those millions of worlds over your head. Remember that perhaps on each of them swarm billions of beings, similar to you or perhaps superior to you in their organization. Look at the Milky Way. The earth cannot even be called a grain of sand in this infinity. It dissolves and vanishes, and with it, you. Where are you? And is what you want simply madness? Do not protect yourselves and remember that no effort is made in vain. And now you can set out on the way.